I wanted to talk today a little bit about how we kind of got to this lawsuit and sort of what and what we were expecting as we go forward. Initially, we, as Quentin said, in 2021, we brought a facial and as applied challenge to a Kansas gang statute, which allows a single law enforcement officer to designate an individual as a member of a criminal street gang. Based on that law enforcement officer's subjective application of some criteria that are listed in the statute. And we brought that case against the city of Wichita because Wichita was the most aggressive user of that statute and had a policy, their policy 527, that incorporated those criteria. Among the criteria, which I'll kind of briefly go through in a minute, the Wichita police applied this. There's no necessary notice given. In fact, nobody's given notice if they are put on the gang list or into the gang database, as they call it. And there's no way to get off. There's no way to challenge your inclusion, and there's no way to actually get off if you haven't been involved in what they consider gang-related criteria for 3 years. Then you are listed as inactive instead of active, but you're never taken off the list. And obviously, the consequences for this can be pretty severe. I mean, for starters, if you are charged with a person felony of any kind, you have a minimum $50,000 bond. And so, you know, where another individual might have a $5,000 bond or even be released on their own recognizance, if you're on the gang list, that means that you have a $50,000 minimum that you can try to get rid of, but no one ever does. The courts really apply it pretty much across the board for anybody who is designated on the gang list. There are very strict probation and parole elements, restrictions that go along with being on the list, including really, really strict curfews, very early curfews, not being allowed to associate with anybody else who's on the gang list, which in many instances will be some of your relatives, perhaps your close family members, not to be in certain areas. They have what they call a mapping system, and you can be told that you can't go into this area or go to this quick trip or go to the mall. I mean, there's all kinds of restrictions. But the biggest thing is you can't associate with other people that they say are on the gang list, which in certain neighborhoods means that you're almost guaranteed to violate those restrictions. They have said that those restrictions are designed. In fact, in our discovery, we found some documentation that those restrictions are actually designed to keep people off the street and to re-imprison and re-incarcerate people. And many of the individuals who are on the gang list end up being incarcerated, not because of their underlying charged crime, but because of a violation of these very strict parole and probation conditions. You can be constantly, you're designated a gang member. So if you're stopped, which the police stop these folks all the time because they recognize their car licenses and registrations. And if you're stopped, they have what they call a signal 33 that's called out. So any police officer approaches you, has information that you're a gang member, which can obviously lead to some really serious consequences for a traffic stop, as we know. And one of the other very bad consequences of being listed on a gang member is that when the prosecutor's office if they bring charges against you and try those charges, they can bring up your alleged gang membership at trial and talk about gang violence and stuff, even if you yourself were never alleged to be part of that particular gang violence, and even if it's not particularly relevant to the charges that you're being tried with. So it obviously creates a very prejudicial situation there if you do decide to go to trial. And in fact, some of our class representatives testified that they took pleas because they knew if they went to trial, they would have this gang this alleged gang membership testimony evidence admitted against them, which would be extremely prejudicial. We also know that even though this list is supposedly confidential, it gets out into the community. Some of the police officers themselves distribute it. It's available to anybody who's a police officer in Wichita and to other governmental law enforcement agencies, such as the KBI. the sheriff's office, a bunch of the DOC, Department of Corrections, all these places. So it does get spread, and we've actually had even incidents where people were denied Section 8 housing or were evicted because officers gave landlords information that someone was on the gang list. And of course, it could pop up on any kind of a background check that you're an active gang member if you're looking for employment and things like that. So it has very serious consequences.